Dearest faraway friend, the mists have returned to Edinburgh, thick as soup, but with a freshly cleaned stillness, drenching the city in a soft focus halo. Still, it's spooky season, and I felt it critical I get out and make the best use of this kind of weather. It would be easy to remain cooped up inside and let the day slip away. Indeed, sometimes I would prefer to wrap up in a blanket with a warm drink and a good book on days like this. But not this time. The enjoyment of cosy alone time only goes so far. And ironically, it's something better enjoyed sometimes with someone else.
That is, as long as we understand that they're meant to be quiet and not disturbing the vibe with chatter.
You've often talked about your liking the somewhat spookier, darker elements of life and literature. But I've noticed you seem drawn to the romantic notions of things, the gothic rather than the grotesque. So I believe we're similar in this. That we may both be uninterested in what passes for contemporary romance, but enjoy the gothic horror and dark fantasy tales for their romanticism. So as I stepped out into the dim light limited views of this misty day, I was not thinking about James Herbert's The Fog. I was thinking of An Interview with the Vampire, Dracula, or even The Crow. That would be the original graphic novel and movie of The Crow, not the 23% on Rotten Tomatoes remake. As I walked by the rust stone walls, I could almost hear the words of The Raven. This I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease, reclining on the cushion's velvet lining that the lamplight gloated o'er, but whose velvet violet lining, with the lamplight gloating o'er, she shall press, nevermore. I was listening to my large, odd and eclectic Spotify playlist as I walked, occasionally finding songs playing that fit perfectly with the white satin-veiled world around me. So many were songs that came from my younger days, yet held little, if any, previous significance. There were songs I'd always liked, but nothing that bore the burden of restless memories refusing to be at peace. As such, each song found itself with space for meaning in that moment. Sometimes these moments are something of a struggle for me. They are uniquely personal, subjective to the core, moments of an internal reflective torrent. As such, they can also carry a great weight, loaded with the spirals of thought, memory and imagination that have built up over time. This makes them the kind of experience difficult to handle without sharing them with someone, a person brave enough to hold your hand through the maelstrom.
Yet these moments can't ever be shared. Not really.
The best we can ever expect is to express them to others and hope someone relates to them. I think now about Albert Camus, when considering the myth of Sisyphus, commented about the god's punishment that they had thought with some reason that there is no more dreadful punishment than futile and hopeless labour. So I find myself wondering, if these attempts to reach out and express these moments is just our rock to roll up the hill. Our burden is our need to connect, our punishment the impossibility of the task. Yet still we keep going. Today we reach out across a space of ones and zeros held together by a global web of fibre optic cables, hoping that someone, somewhere, will understand. Our minds finding our souls craving. I consider all the occasions of venturing out through the forgiving shelter of darkness at night to be with others that we may drunkenly embrace and rub up against each other, hoping beyond hope that one day our bodies would find what our souls crave. Neither of these seem to have much real success. The truth is that the Misty City can be a lonely experience, being alone in a space where all others remain out of sight until almost close enough to touch. Yet, as I walked these ancient streets, I didn't feel lonely. I was content in being alone. In a way, I was not alone. I had my task, my letter to you, this letter to you. Because I was out there with you in mind, my dear faraway friend, my walk was not about me. The walk was for you. The mists rolling through the alleys a backdrop I felt you would enjoy. The journey was not a journey of self-expression or personal experience. It was done with someone else in mind. With that came a sense of joy, contentment, and purpose. As though we can only share ourselves with each other if we first forget ourselves and seek the joy of others. Of course, this might be just a me thing, but apparently the Germans have a word for something similar. Freudenfreude, which I probably just butchered. That's the feeling of joy from the joy of others.
Have you ever found this to be true? Not just taking joy in other people's joy, but in finding contentment and purpose in doing something to promote that joy.
In some ways, it occurs to me that I've now begun to talk about joy from an experience of spooky, eerie, misty days in a somewhat spooky old city. Auld Reekie. If you've never heard the term Auld Reekie for Edinburgh, it's probably a bit confusing. For a start, for English speakers, it sounds like a comment on the city's smell. In fact, the nickname is Scots, and actually means something closer to the old smoke. Rather than a comment on the smell of the city, the nickname seems to have arisen from the effect all the city's chimneys had this time of year, combining with the fogs. An effect that created thick, lingering, smoky fog conditions that would blanket the city for days. These mists have lasted for about 3 days as I write this. That's probably the longest I've ever known them to last. There is an aspect of joy to the creepy, spooky and darker things in life though. When you think about the celebrations of Halloween, particularly as celebrated in the United States, there is a joy found in the dark. Even when thinking about people going to see horror movies or read horror fiction, there is a strange joy to be found. It is the joy of hot chocolate by the fireplace with those closest to you, as everyone tells each other ghost stories. It just occurred to me, that might be an experience you've never had. I'm not sure how often you've ever had to gather round a fireplace with warm drinks, sharing stories to both scare and delight. I remember the youngest of my sisters telling me stories about murderous possessed grandfather clocks and killer demon dolls. It's probably no surprise that in my teens my favourite author was Stephen King.
I don't think I've asked you, but do you enjoy horror stuff?
I guess the enjoyment of the terrifying is the same as that of the roller coaster. We exist within its confines, believing in the danger of it, but really we know it likely won't harm us. As such, we get the adrenaline rush for survival and the gratification of surviving without significant risk. I remember reading once that we aren't damaged by stress as much as was previously thought. Rather, what damages us is stress without release. More than that, though, is that shared stress with release builds social bonds and is actually good for our mental and physical health. Unfortunately, I can't remember where I read it. It does pose some interesting questions, though, about how we best interact and get to know each other. For all the regular exercise and meditation advice we get bombarded with these days, perhaps the best thing to do is go watch a horror movie with friends.
On the other hand, perhaps it's a walk in the mists in a beautiful city with somebody you care about.
Or for a person you care about. So let me return to those streets with you. I had made my way around much of the old town, albeit mostly avoiding the Royal Mile, and had little taste for the new town and its Georgian splendour. Instead, I got on the tram and made my way to what was once nothing more than a small fishing village. New Haven still holds some of its small village charm, although the main road running by the shore has done its damage. The old harbour is intact and still in use by a small working fishing fleet. There are a couple of good fishmongers, restaurants, and a really quite good fish and chips place that does a lot more than the usual chippy. Unfortunately, I was just a little better off than completely broke, and there was no way I could afford £12 fish and chips. No. I took myself to the local pub and spent £2.50 on a Coke and a bag of salt and vinegar crisps. The pub was quiet and cosy, in that British old man pub kind of way, giving me the chance to write. Being out at New Haven in the mists had given me several ideas for a new poem. It was as though walking around I just kept coming across metaphors for what I was thinking about. You see, I had found myself thinking through things at a remarkable rate all day, as though the fog had turned the city into some kind of sensory deprivation chamber, and I had little else to distract me beyond my thoughts. Perhaps also in connection to the mists, my thoughts were about getting uncontrollably lost. The kind of being lost that you enter into believing you know the way, or can at least navigate through it, only to find that you are soon completely lost. Moreover, it made me think of how we sometimes enter relationships like that. I wonder if you can relate to that. After the brief stop at the pub, I ventured out into the mists again, found the closest bus stop, and made my way home. I had work to do, such as writing this letter, but soon enough it was time to settle down and enjoy a good book. I've just started reading The King's Witches by Kate Foster, a really interesting piece of historical fiction that revolves around the Scottish witch trials of the later 16th century. I'll tell you about it when I finished it, but it's been very good so far. In connection, not so long ago, I read a short novel called Hex by Jenny Fagan. That was the book that drove me into an obsessive spiral to learn and read more about that period. Then, into the representations and ideas of the dangerous female in various folklore and mythology. Hex is a somewhat unusual story, as it's about a contemporary woman kind of astral projecting herself back in time. She emerges to have a conversation with one of the first victims of the Edinburgh witch trials. The whole book is written primarily as a conversation, albeit a somewhat surreal and odd one. What's more is that it does a good job of reflecting how that victim had no other magic beyond that which all women possess. She is not a woman outside of society. She's not a medieval midwife, not a herbalist or a healer. None of the common tropes of what witches were really. No. This victim is nothing more than a common teenage girl. I would like to add that, should you wish to read Hex, there are moments in it that are extremely hard to read. At times I found myself clasping my hand over my mouth in both shock and disgust. This book lands some devastating gut punches. The conversation also lends itself to something of a reflection on the contemporary world too, offering criticism of some of those things that are still largely tolerated, accepted, or ignored. Things that should never be acceptable. It is a book I highly recommend though. The author is actually more of a poet, so it's worth reading some of her poetry too, something I'm currently doing. As with last time, I've included the poem I wrote in the pub with this letter. You'll find it at the end. I'm hoping you're enjoying the poetry, but I haven't had chance to hear back from you before I started on this letter. So next time we talk, please let me know what you think. You know how much I value your thoughts and insights. Although I do constantly live in fear that you just won't like what I write. That's probably the perpetual and universal writer's demon talking. I hope so anyway. In the meantime, I look forward to talking to you again and hearing back after you've received this letter. Of course, you can expect another letter next Sunday. It would be useful though if you let me know if you liked this letter and are subscribing for more. From your faraway friend, James.